Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce someone very special.
From organizing some of the largest parties in New York City and all over the world to surviving Fyre Festival.
Won't go that far, I'm sure, but...
He is the ultimate team player.
His name is Andy King.
Welcome to Take Two with Andy King.
All right, so today I thought I'd tell you a funny story, and it's coincidental that this story actually has something to do with, indirectly, it's another Fyre Festival situation. And it's a party that I was hosting for, yes, the wonderful, my friend, Billy McFarland. This was probably 2 years before Fyre. It should have been a warning sign for me, red light, but I wasn't picking up the clues at that point. But in a typical fashion, Billy calls me and he says, "Geez, Andy, we want to host a party for all of our Magneses members," and that was the credit card company that Billy had that I was on the board of. And I said, "Sure, how many?" He said, "Well, we're looking at between, 600 and 800 attendees." I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty big." And he said, "We're going to have a performer. I'm not sure who it is yet, but we're looking for a really cool venue." So I set out. This is in New York City, and I went all around doing my usual site selection work, and I went over and saw the Brooklyn Savings Bank, which is kind of on the edge of Williamsburg, right across the Brooklyn Bridge. And an Argentinian couple had recently bought it and put, almost $20 million into this place. It was absolutely beautiful. Oh my gosh, from the flooring to the windows to the trims to, you name it. It was just, they took, they spared no expense, let's say, in making this beautiful old bank stunning. Even the exterior with all the staircases and plantings and statues, it really was beautiful. We met with them, and Billy loved the place, and we decided, yep, sign us up. So we booked the Brooklyn Savings Bank for this event. And the event was to take place, we were about a month out. And so through the course of the meeting, the owners of the Brooklyn Savings Bank, were asking all the typical questions like, who are the guests and how many and what's the timing and how long is the event, et cetera, et cetera. And we were able to answer all these cool questions, and everything went really, really fine. But one of the things that, the owners were fixated on was like the attendees and who exactly were they. And as we explained to him, this was an event being thrown for Magneses members, all these kids that have the black credit card. This was a perk for them, and so he was comfortable with that, and so was I. Let's just say, a week or two later, I'm with Billy, and I said, "Billy, how are the RSVPs coming?" And he said, "Well, they're not coming in as much as I thought they would." And I said, "Well, you should probably send another tickler out to the members, and I'm sure we'll, fill this up." And he agreed. And probably 2 days later, I get a phone call from the owners of the Brooklyn Savings Bank, and they're like, "Andy, what's going on?" I said, "Well, we're still waiting on RSVPs." "Well, we heard the party being advertised on a radio station, and it's all over the internet." And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "You and Billy committed to me that this was members only and that it wasn't opened up, to the outside world." I said, "Well, geez, don't worry. I will, I'll call Billy and I'll ring you right back." So I called Billy, and Billy's like, "Well, Andy, I was worried that we weren't going to get the numbers that we needed. And so I've opened it up." And I said, "Well, you committed to the bank that you weren't going to do that." And but I called back. I calmed him down. I just said, "Listen, we're really looking carefully at the list, and we'll review everything and make sure that, with the proper security, et cetera, everything should be fine." And they agreed, which was wonderful. The next day, I get an urgent call. I'm like, "What is going on?" And the owner of the Brooklyn Savings Bank says, "Andy, we just got a call from the NYPD." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, why is the police department calling?" And he said, "Well, apparently you guys have booked a famous rapper, not a raptor. Is that a raptor? No, a rapper. And I said, oh gosh, well, Billy has developed this huge love for rappers these days. I'm not sure why, but all the young kids seem to like it as well. He said, well, this particular rapper, and I won't name his name, many of you will figure it out, had recently staged his own drive-by shooting to kind of, I guess you'd say, give himself street credit again and to kind of get him back in the press a little bit. And obviously the person he hired didn't kill him, which was the plan, but they just grazed his shoulder or something. But he was all over the press with his shooting, and then only to figure out that he'd actually staged it himself. Now, when anybody books this rapper, all the local police departments are notified that he's coming into town, and they need to beef up the force to make sure that there's no problems with gangs and I don't know, people that are going to rough you up, because those are the people he seems to hang out with. And so the owner of the bank was really, really thrown. And he said, Andy, this isn't happening. And I said, geez, don't worry. Well, he said, no, I am worried. We've put $20 million into this beautiful old building. This is not the kind of party that we want, and we're canceling it. I'm like, oh my gosh, no. And guess what? We had a week and a half out, let's just say, and I had to scramble. Now, I got all this news when I was actually up at my summer house in Cape Cod for Labor Day weekend, because guess what? The party was the weekend after Labor Day, and I left halfway through the weekend and went straight down to New York to search for a space that would hold 600 to 800 people that I could book in 7 days. I mean, unbelievable. Well, I scoured Brooklyn the best I could, and I found this amazing loft there, and I had my work cut out for me, as I'm sure you would figure out. Yeah, hello, 1 week to plan a party for 800 people? Yeah, that's definitely, once again, shades of fire. Well, one of the challenges was that the famous rapper's PR team and the rapper had come to see the Brooklyn Savings Bank and loved it. And when they heard that we were moving the event, they weren't happy either. And when I showed the PR team the cool loft I found, they said, Andy, you got to zip this place up a little bit because our boss is not thrilled. Well, in comes 3 or 4 or 5 graffiti artists that I hired. And I always love hiring graffiti artists because they do such amazing street art. And it always makes places look kind of gritty and cool. So I partnered with the PR team and I said, is there anything that this rapper would like? And they're like, well, he'd love his logo done in gold. I'm like, oh my gosh. So of course, that was 2 or 3 days of painting this huge logo up on the stage. And then they said he really would love certain kind of furniture up on stage, kind of like royalty, a big king and queen's chair and chairs and, incredible staging and a very expensive oriental rug and a chandelier. I'm like, oh my word. All right. Well, that's how it goes. And they said, and by the way, our boss, this famous rapper, wants a pretty elaborate green room. And they sent me the rider, which was just a mile long with, you can't even imagine, like probably M&Ms that were only red to cases of the most expensive vodka you could buy and cases of the most expensive champagne you could buy and certain kinds of sushi and a certain kind of Indian food that it was just unbelievable. I won't even tell you how much was spent on this green room. But I'm like, all right. And Billy kept saying, Andy, whatever he wants, please, whatever he wants. I said, okay. So, we worked day and night. And then I got the next rider from the management team of this famous rapper. And they said, well, he travels with a posse, which so many of these people do. And he had 20 or 30 pals that were going to be coming with him. And they all needed to be driven in big Suburbans. So, of course, in comes the 10 Suburbans now. And I'm like, wow, this is becoming more and more expensive every day. Like, oh, my word. Speaking of the money, and of course, this is another crazy part of it, is that Billy called me and said, geez, we need to prepay this performer. And I said, okay, fine. And he said, well, swing by my office, which I did. And he said, he handed me a paper bag. And I'm like, what is this? It was a paper bag full of cash because, of course, this performer would only accept cash. I'm like, are you kidding me? He said, no. And it was a large amount of money that I had to deliver to the team, the management team of this rapper, which I did but I had a car and a driver very close by. And we met on the street and handed off the money, and they were committed to coming to perform. We were about 2 days out now, and then I get a call from this famous rapper's manager. I won't name his name either, but he was quite eccentric. And he said, we have a problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, we just got word from your event team that the rapper and all of his friends need to go through metal detectors to go into the party. And I said, absolutely. We just helped organize an event with Beyonce and her team. And guess what? They all went through metal detectors. I mean, so he's like, sorry, it ain't happening. And we went back and forth, and he hung up the phone, and he was checking again, and called back. No way, no one's going through a metal detector. Meanwhile, my business partner and my lawyer are like, Andy, well, you're not hosting the event if they won't go through a metal detector. And I went back and forth, and finally I called back the manager, and I said, I mean, what is the problem? And he said, well, Andy, this performer and all of his friends pack. And I'm like, pack? What, like pack a lunch? And of course he laughed at me. He said, no, they all pack guns. I'm like, guns? You're going to bring guns to a preppy college kid's party in New York City? Are you kidding me? There can't be any guns. Oh my gosh. So, of course, I confided in my lawyer. I said, Andy, you're canceling the event immediately. And then, of course, Billy's on the phone with me. Andy, please. The management team's really upset. You're putting up roadblocks. I'm like, Billy, they can't bring guns into this event. They just can't. Finally, at like the 9th hour, when I was about to pull the plug, they called and said, all right, we'll leave all the guns in the Suburbans. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank God. So the party begins. And of course, finally the big rapper arrives. Big guy, man boobs, sweating up a storm, singing 2 or 3 songs, the kids just screaming and loving it and jumping up and down. And of course, every other word was an F-bomb out of his mouth. I just couldn't believe that everybody loved it so much. And they did. And we had trapeze artists, topless practically, hanging from the ceiling. And we had fire dancers, and there was exotic food, and there was the lighting was unbelievable. It really was a magical party. And there was Billy, kind of like a puppy dog, and all he wanted was to be able to hang with this rapper and get his picture taken with him and the team and on and on and on. Well, the rapper's management team had gotten a call shortly before our party from a big venue in New York City who said, hey, would this rapper agree to do a surprise last-minute performance somewhere else after he performed for us? And of course, they said absolutely for the right amount of money. So guess what? The rapper, the management team, and all the posse finished their 3 or 4 songs. The kids were cheering, and they walked straight out, straight past the entrance to the green room, and right into their cars and drove away. And you've never seen someone look more unhappy and sad in your life than poor Billy, who was waiting to have his pictures taken with all of them and chat away and hang out in the green room. Oh, no, off they went. Well, poor Billy grabbed his car and driver, and I think he chased them down and probably followed them for the rest of the evening. But do you think that should have been a few red lights for me? Now, meanwhile, let's just make it a little bit worse. Me getting paid, because of course I ended up fronting a lot of the money for this event. And probably should have understood what was going on and didn't at the time, but saying to Billy, listen, Billy, I fronted all this money on my credit card and I need to get paid back. And so Billy's like, okay, I totally understand, absolutely. And off he goes and says, okay, I have set up a wire, a bank wire, and it'll be